I didn't realize you could lose your mother 3 different times in one lifetime until I looked up from my wedding aisle and saw the empty chair where she was supposed to be. The first time I lost her, I was 15, standing in a bank lobby with my first paycheck in my hand. I remember the smell of carpet cleaner and the way my mom, Denise, kept tapping her nails against the counter, impatient, like my money was already late. She smiled at the teller, asked for a joint account because she's underage, and squeezed my shoulder like we were a team. 2 months later, I stood at an ATM after my shift, my fingers still smelling like cardboard and produce, and watched the balance flash back at me. 0. I stared until the screen dimmed. Then I drove home with my stomach twisting, rehearsing a conversation that felt too big for a kid to have with her own mother. She didn't even look away from the TV when I asked. I needed it, she said, like that was the end of the story. When I asked when she would pay it back, she laughed. Actually laughed. And told me living in her house wasn't free. After that, payday became a ritual. I'd walk through the door, still in my grocery store apron, and she'd hold out her hand. Debit card. PIN. Every dollar. And when I finally tried to tell someone, my aunt, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table and whispered the sentence that sealed my silence for years. If you complain again, I'll call social services. You can take your chances in foster care. So when I got engaged at 26, 3 months ago now, part of me still wanted to believe in miracles. Part of me wanted to believe a woman could wake up one day and decide to be a mother for real. She called. She sounded sweet. She brought a fiancé, Billy, polite, successful, wealthy enough to make my mother sit up straighter. Then she looked at my wedding plan, simple, honest, within our budget, and said with total clarity that she wouldn't come unless I made it expensive enough to impress his rich family. And I didn't. I got married without her. But the real shock didn't hit until 3 weeks later when Billy texted me from a number I didn't recognize and said, I need to talk to you, privately. She can't know. My name is Hannah. I'm 26, and I've spent most of my life learning how to keep my needs small enough to fit inside someone else's comfort. If you met me now, clean hair, decent job, a wedding ring on my left hand, you'd probably assume I grew up normal, middle class, safe, a little strict maybe, the kind of childhood where you roll your eyes at your mom's rules and then hug her at graduation. But my mom, Denise, didn't raise me like a daughter. She raised me like a backup plan. When I was little, I didn't have the words for it. I just knew she could be 2 different people depending on who was watching. At church, she was the tired single mom who did everything for her girl. At home, she was a woman who kept score. Every meal, every light bulb, every ride to school counted as a debt I'd owe forever. My dad died when I was 20, not in a dramatic, cinematic way. It was slow and ugly. Medical appointments, bills, and the quiet fear of realizing grief comes with paperwork. He left behind mostly debt. No house, no nest egg, no hidden account. Just a hole in my life and a mother who suddenly acted like she was the one who deserved to be compensated for surviving it. So at 15, when Denise told me to get a job, it didn't sound like a punishment at first. She framed it like responsibility. You're old enough to contribute, she said, standing in the doorway of my room with her arms folded. I'm not raising a lazy kid. I found a weekend job at a grocery store. Bagging, stocking, cleaning up spills people pretended they didn't make. I liked the routine. I liked earning something that was mine. And then she took it. At first, she used the joint account excuse. Then it became the normal. By 16, she wasn't even pretending anymore. On payday, she would wait on the couch like a landlord, take my debit card, pull my entire check, and toss it back like she was returning a library book. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the way she quit her own job once she realized she could live off mine. I was a 16-year-old girl working 20 hours a week for minimum wage, and my mother, an adult, stopped going to her call center job because, in her words, I don't need to work anymore. When I tried to tell my aunt, I thought I was asking for help. I didn't know I was lighting a fuse. Denise found out, and that night she sat me at the kitchen table. She didn't yell. She didn't slam doors. She leaned in close, voice low like she was sharing a family secret, and threatened to throw me into foster care if I ever made her look bad again. Fear can train you. It trained me to be quiet, to be agreeable, to survive by not needing anything. I graduated high school with decent grades through pure stubbornness and caffeine. I applied for a full tuition scholarship at the state university, my one exit route, my one shot. And my mom found the acceptance letter first. She hid it. I only learned the truth because the university called the house to confirm details. I remember standing in the hallway with the phone pressed to my ear, my heart pounding, and Denise's face tightening in the kitchen like she'd been caught stealing something that belonged to me. That's also around the time I met Tom. Tom was a friend of a coworker. He wasn't flashy. He didn't try to charm me with lines. He just listened. The kind of listening that makes you feel like your words are safe to exist. On our second real conversation, I told him the truth about my mom, how she took my paychecks, how she threatened me, how I felt like I'd been paying rent since I was a child. He didn't look at me like I was exaggerating. He looked at me like he believed me. And that belief, quiet, steady, ended up changing everything. Because Tom had something I didn't, a family that knew what love was supposed to look like. His parents owned their home outright. They weren't rich, but they were stable. They offered me a room while I started university. His mom helped me gather documents Denise had misplaced. His dad drove me to campus to fix my delayed acceptance. I moved out of my mother's house 1 week before classes started. Denise called every day for a month, calling me selfish, ungrateful, a traitor. Then the calls faded into occasional guilt trips. Years passed. I graduated. I got a job as a database administrator. I built a life. And a year after I started working full-time, Tom proposed, like a man who wasn't afraid to make commitment a promise instead of a trap. That's when my mother came back. Not with an apology. With a new voice, a new story, a new fiancé, and the kind of demand that proved she hadn't changed at all. When my mother re-entered my life, she didn't come back loudly. She came back carefully. At first, it was just phone calls. No requests, no guilt, no sudden emergencies, just, "How are you doing?" and "I was thinking about you today." The kind of sentences that sound harmless, unless you grew up learning how to read between them. The first call lasted 20 minutes. I sat on the edge of our couch, twisting my engagement ring around my finger while Tom pretended not to listen from the kitchen. When I hung up, my chest felt tight, but not in pain, in confusion. "She didn't ask for anything," I said. Tom raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't mean she won't." He didn't tell me what to do. He never does. He just makes space for me to decide without pressure. That's one of the ways I know I married the right man. Over the next 2 months, the calls continued, every week or so. Sometimes she asked about my job, sometimes about Tom. Once she asked if I was happy. I wanted to believe that question mattered. So when I finally told her I was engaged, my voice shook like I was offering her something fragile. She sounded pleased. Genuinely pleased, I thought. She congratulated me, asked when the wedding would be, asked if she could come. I said yes. That should have been the end of it. A simple yes, carefully earned. But my mother has never accepted anything without adjusting the terms later. About a month after that, she asked to meet for coffee. I chose a public place without even consciously deciding to. Habit. Survival instinct. She didn't come alone. "This is Billy," she said, smiling wider than usual. "My fiancé." He stood to shake my hand. Firm grip, clean shirt. Confident in the way men get when life has mostly gone their way. He owned a small chain of hardware stores. 54. Divorced. No kids. Polite enough to make me lower my guard by a few inches. We talked for an hour. About work. About the weather. About how Tom and I met. My mom laughed more than I'd ever seen her laugh, touching Billy's arm like she needed to anchor herself to his presence. She seemed different. Calmer. Softer. Less sharp. I let myself believe it. Tom and I had already planned the wedding by then. Nothing extravagant. A small church. A dress from a department store that fit me perfectly without needing to cost a fortune. A photographer for 2 hours. A reception in the church hall with catered food from a local place we loved. $8,000 total. Every choice was intentional. Every line item reflected who we were and what we valued. We were paying for it ourselves. Tom's parents had offered to help, but we wanted to stand on our own feet. When my mom asked about the details, I told her. Her smile dropped like it had been unplugged. "Why so basic?" she asked, frowning. I laughed awkwardly, assuming she was joking. "Because we want to save for a house." She didn't laugh. She brought it up again the next week, and the week after that. "You could do better," she said. "A nicer venue wouldn't hurt. A real reception hall would look more appropriate." Finally, I asked the question I should have asked sooner. "Why does this matter so much to you?" She stared into her coffee for a long time, long enough that I could hear the espresso machine hissing behind the counter. Then she said it. "Billy's family is used to a certain standard." I blinked. "What does that have to do with us?" She looked up, eyes sharp again, familiar. Your wedding reflects on me. And just like that, the illusion cracked. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about being embarrassed. She wanted me to upgrade my wedding, triple the budget, rewrite the plan, abandon what Tom and I had chosen so she could look impressive in front of people I'd never met. I told her no. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. She called me stubborn, short-sighted, accused me of sabotaging her future. When I asked her to leave the cafe, she stood up slowly, leaned close, and said, "You'll regret this." 2 weeks before the wedding, she called with an ultimatum. "If you don't upgrade it," she said, voice tight, "I won't come." I told her that was her choice. She hung up. And on my wedding day, the chair beside the aisle stayed empty. Not because I forgot her, but because she chose her image over her daughter again. The morning of my wedding was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Not peaceful, intentional. The kind of quiet that settles over a room when everyone is careful not to say the wrong thing, when joy is present but fragile, like it knows it could crack if handled too roughly. I sat in the small dressing room behind the church, my dress hanging from the doorframe, the fabric catching the light every time someone walked past. Tom's sister helped me with my hair. My hand shook as she pinned it into place, but not from nerves about marrying Tom. That part felt solid, certain. It was everything else that felt unstable. I checked my phone more times than I want to admit. No missed calls, no messages, no last-minute change of heart. An hour before the ceremony, a text came through from my mother. Not a congratulations, not an apology, just a sentence. "You need to learn that choices have consequences. I hope you think about what you've done." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I locked my phone and slid it into my bag like it could bite me if I wasn't careful. I didn't cry. Not then. Something in me had gone very still, very cold, like a part of my body that had learned long ago how to go numb to survive. The ceremony went on. The music started. The doors opened. I walked down the aisle toward the man who had never once asked me to be smaller for his comfort. Tom's eyes filled when he saw me, and that was enough to keep my feet moving. I said my vows with a steady voice. I meant every word. When the officiant said husband and wife, the room erupted in applause, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt weightless. Then came the reception. The church hall smelled like warm bread and flowers. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Someone turned the music up too loud, and Tom's aunt danced anyway. It might have stayed perfect if people hadn't noticed the empty seat. "Where's your mom?" Tom's aunt asked gently, like she was checking on a missing coat. I felt Tom's hand tighten around mine. I could have lied. I could have said she was sick, or delayed, or stuck in traffic. I could have protected her image one last time. But I didn't want to carry that for her anymore. So I told the truth. Not dramatically, not bitterly, just the facts. I said she wanted us to triple the budget. I said she said the wedding was too cheap. I said she gave me an ultimatum and chose not to come. The room didn't explode. It went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people suddenly recognize a pattern they've seen before but never named. One of my cousins nodded slowly. That sounds like her. An aunt sighed and said, "She's always cared more about appearances than people." No one defended her. No one said I should have tried harder. And that silence, shared understanding, felt like something finally clicking into place. The rest of the reception went on. We danced, we cut the cake. Tom whispered jokes in my ear to make me smile for photos. Life moved forward despite her absence. But I noticed Tom's parents in the corner, talking quietly with his aunt, glancing over at me with expressions I couldn't read. I didn't ask. I was too happy to borrow trouble that night. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. "This is Billy. I need to talk to you privately. It's important." Denise can't know. I showed Tom immediately. He didn't panic. He didn't tell me no. He just said, "If you meet him, we do it in public." So we did. A diner near our apartment. Neutral, bright, busy. Billy arrived exactly on time. He looked different, tired, the confidence gone from his shoulders, like it had leaked out slowly over a few sleepless nights. He ordered coffee. His hands shook slightly when he picked up the mug. He started with, "Why didn't you invite your mother to your wedding?" I stopped him right there. That's not what happened. And as I explained, slowly, carefully, I watched his face change. Confusion, then doubt, then something heavier settling in his eyes. "That's not the story she told me," he said quietly. "According to my mother, I had uninvited her out of jealousy. She said I couldn't handle the comparison between our weddings. She said I excluded her on purpose." Then Billy told me the part that made my stomach drop. She had told him she owned property. She had told him she owned my house. I laughed before I could stop myself, a sharp, disbelieving sound. I rent an apartment, I said, with my husband. The color drained from his face. And that was when he finally told me why he was really there. Because once the lies started unraveling, they didn't stop. And my wedding, simple, honest, real, had been the first crack in a story my mother had built on sand. I didn't interrupt Billy when he started explaining. I just listened. That's something I learned young. When someone is finally telling the truth, you don't rush them. You let the silence do its work. He leaned forward over the diner table, elbows planted like he needed the weight to keep himself grounded. She told me she had investments, he said. Savings, property. She said she came into the relationship on equal footing. I stared at the condensation sliding down my water glass, my fingers numb around it. Billy continued, voice lower now. My lawyer suggested a prenup. I said no. I thought we were building something together. My chest tightened, not with sympathy exactly, but recognition. I knew what it felt like to believe a version of my mother that only existed because you needed it to. She doesn't have investments, I said quietly. She never has. His jaw clenched. I told him everything, not with anger, not with drama, just facts stacked carefully on top of each other. How she quit her job when I was 16, how she lived off my paychecks, how she borrowed money from family and never paid it back, how invitations dried up because people were tired of being used. Billy rubbed his face with both hands and stayed like that for a full minute. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, but not in a way that asked for comfort. She has 4 credit cards, he said, all maxed out, nearly $40,000, loans from friends, no records of repayment. I felt strangely calm, not vindicated, not relieved, just unsurprised. She told me the debt was temporary, he added, said money was tied up in investments that would mature soon. I met his eyes. That's not true. He nodded slowly, like he already knew. When he stood up to leave, he thanked me for being honest, left cash on the table, walked out without looking back. Tom slid into the booth across from me after Billy was gone. He didn't ask questions right away, just took my hand. You okay? He asked. I nodded. And I was. Mostly. Because something important had happened in that diner. I hadn't defended my mother. I hadn't softened the truth. I had just told it. 5 days later, my phone rang. It was Denise. She didn't say hello. She screamed, called me a liar, vindictive, jealous, accused me of ruining her life because I couldn't stand seeing her happy. Billy had called off the wedding, kicked her out of his house. Everything was my fault. I waited until she ran out of breath. Then I asked a simple question. What did you expect me to do? She didn't hesitate. You should have lied. You should have backed me up. Family protects family. The words landed, hollow and familiar. You stopped being family, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, when you stole my paychecks. Silence. You stopped being family when you threatened me with foster care, when you skipped my wedding. She hung up. An hour later, she called back. Her voice was different this time, small, careful. She asked if she could stay with Tom and me for a few weeks. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. I said no. She said I was cruel, that the past was the past, that people make mistakes. I told her to call the friends she borrowed from, the family she ignored. Then I hung up. That evening, Tom sat with me on the couch, our fingers intertwined, the quiet comfortable instead of heavy. She didn't call again. Not that night. Not until she ran out of other options. And when she did, the pattern repeated itself with a precision that finally made one thing undeniable. My mother wasn't apologizing. She was applying pressure. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't folding. But the situation didn't de-escalate. It tightened. Because when someone who has lived their entire life off manipulation loses access to their easiest source, they don't disappear. They escalate. And the next phase of this story would force me to choose, once and for all, whether survival meant distance or confrontation. The calls started after everyone else stopped answering. I found out later that my mother had gone down the list like it was a spreadsheet. Aunt, cousins, distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. Every conversation followed the same script. She'd cry, describe herself as betrayed, insist she was just going through a rough patch, and ask for somewhere to stay. Or money. Or both. No one said yes. One cousin told me Denise still owed her $800 from a car repair emergency the year before. An aunt reminded me, quietly, almost apologetically, that she'd never been repaid the $1,200 she'd loaned 2 years ago. Tom's parents didn't even return her voicemail. When the safety net disappeared, so did my mother's tone. I learned she'd ended up at a shelter from a cousin who volunteered there, not as gossip, more like a warning. The shelter had a job placement program. Denise was assigned to a diner. Dishwashing, bussing tables, anything they could find. A week later, that same cousin saw her there in uniform. She didn't say a word, my cousin told me, just cleared the table and kept going. I didn't feel satisfaction or guilt. I felt distant. 3 weeks after that, Tom and I walked into a diner for lunch without thinking. It was busy, loud, ordinary. She was our server. She froze when she saw us, just for a fraction of a second. Then her face went blank, like a switch flipped. "What can I get you to drink?" she asked, eyes fixed on her notepad. Her voice was flat, professional. Tom ordered water. I did too. She took the order, brought the food, dropped the check. No apology, no confrontation, no attempt to break the distance. Tom thanked her for the food as she walked away. She nodded once and didn't turn back. We paid at the register and left. I didn't cry. Seeing her like that, tired, smaller, stripped of the performance she'd built her life on, didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel resolved. A month passed without contact. Then one evening, I came home from work and found her sitting on the concrete steps outside our apartment building. She stood when she saw me. Her eyes were swollen. Her clothes were clean but worn thin. "We need to talk," she said. "I don't," I replied. She said she was sorry, that she wanted to fix things, that being alone had made her realize what she'd lost. I asked her a question I already knew the answer to. "What do you want to fix?" "Our relationship," she said quickly. "And why now?" She hesitated. That pause told me everything. Tom came down the stairs behind me. He didn't touch me, just stood close enough to remind me I wasn't alone. My mother looked at him, then back at me. "You've changed," she said. "You're cold." I met her gaze. "You didn't raise me. Tom's parents did." She opened her mouth, closed it, then walked away. 2 days later, my cousin warned me Denise had been asking about my work schedule. I told my supervisor. He handled it without judgment. Security would escort her out if she showed up. She didn't, but she came back to the apartment. Late, buzzing the intercom, insisting on 5 minutes. I told her to leave. She refused. I went down alone while Tom watched from the window. She asked for money, $900, first and last month on a room. Promised she'd pay it back. I reminded her of the thousands she'd already taken. "That was different," she said. "I was struggling." "I know," I said. "So was I." I went back inside. A week later, she returned, buzzed the intercom nonstop. Tom called the police non-emergency line. An officer arrived, spoke to her, walked her away. They issued a warning. She hasn't come back since. 2 months have passed. She's still working at the diner, living in a weekly motel, picking up extra shifts. I don't feel anything about it. Not anger, not relief, just clarity. Because this escalation showed me something undeniable. Every time I held a boundary, she revealed exactly why it was necessary. And standing firm didn't destroy my family. It finally made the truth visible. But clarity often comes with grief. And the lowest point wasn't behind me yet. Because letting go of a parent, truly letting go, means mourning someone who is still alive. And that realization would break me before it freed me. The hardest part wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the accusations or the public scenes or even watching my mother's life collapse under the weight of her own lies. The hardest part was the quiet that came after. Once the police warning was issued, my phone stayed silent. No late-night voicemails, no frantic messages, no buzzing intercom, just days stretching into weeks without her voice intruding on my life. I thought that silence would feel like relief. Instead, it felt like grief. Not the clean, cinematic kind where you cry and then breathe easier. This was heavier, subtle. It showed up in places I didn't expect. When I folded laundry, when I passed a mother and daughter laughing in the grocery store aisle, when someone at work mentioned their parents casually, like that relationship was a given. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Tom slept beside me, his breathing steady and grounding. I would replay moments from my childhood, searching for something, anything, that could prove I'd imagined the cruelty, that maybe I'd misunderstood, that maybe she had loved me in her own broken way. But every memory that surfaced contradicted that hope. The bank lobby, the ATM screen flashing 0, her voice, calm and cold, threatening foster care like it was a casual inconvenience. I started asking myself questions I'd avoided my entire life. What if I'd been a better daughter? What if I'd been more grateful? What if I'd just made the wedding fancier? Would she have shown up? Those thoughts were dangerous. I knew that. They slipped in quietly, wearing guilt like logic. Tom noticed before I said anything. One night, he turned off the TV halfway through a show and looked at me. "You're blaming yourself," he said. I shrugged. Maybe I could have handled things differently. He didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He just asked, "What would you have done differently?" I opened my mouth and realized I didn't have an answer that didn't involve erasing myself. That realization hurt more than any confrontation, because it meant the price of peace had always been my silence. A week later, I dreamed about her. She was standing in my childhood kitchen, younger, smiling, holding a birthday cake I never remembered having. She called my name like she used to when she wanted something. I woke up crying. That was my lowest point. Not when she screamed, not when she demanded money, not when she was escorted away by police. It was mourning the mother I never actually had. I took a day off work and sat alone in our apartment, letting myself feel it fully for the first time. The sadness, the anger, the hollow space where a parent's protection should have been. I didn't distract myself. I didn't rationalize. I let it hurt. And in that pain, something shifted. I realized I wasn't grieving her absence. I was grieving the illusion that she could ever be the mother I needed. Once that illusion broke, the guilt lost its power. But clarity doesn't come without cost. Because as the fog lifted, I understood something else, something heavier. My mother didn't want reconciliation. She wanted access. And access to my money, my home, my emotional labor was the only version of love she'd ever offered. That understanding sat in my chest like a weight. And it forced a final question. If she came back one more time, really came back, would I be strong enough to say no without explaining myself? I didn't know the answer yet, but life had a way of testing boundaries when you least expect it. And soon, I wouldn't have the luxury of uncertainty. The moment that finally settled, everything didn't come with shouting. It came with a request. It was a Friday evening, the kind that feels like a reward after a long week. Tom and I were on the couch, shoes kicked off, debating what movie to watch. The apartment smelled like garlic and butter from dinner, the windows cracked open to let in the cooling air. The intercom buzzed. Once. Then again. I froze. Tom reached for the remote and muted the TV. "Don't answer it," he said gently. The buzzing started again, longer this time, insistent. I walked to the intercom and pressed the button. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It's me," my mother said. "I need 5 minutes." "No," I replied. "You need to leave." "I won't leave until you come down," she said. Tom was already standing. "I'll call the police." "Wait," I said, not because I felt guilty, but because I knew this was the moment I'd been preparing for. I went downstairs alone. Tom stayed by the window, watching. My mother stood on the sidewalk under the streetlight. She looked worse than the last time I'd seen her. Thinner. Dark circles etched deep beneath her eyes. Her clothes were clean, but everything about her looked worn. "I need help," she said immediately. "Not for me, just a room." She explained quickly. Too quickly. The shelter had a limit. Her time was up. She'd found a room for rent, but needed first and last month up front. $900. "You have a good job," she added. "That's not much to you." There it was. The same equation she'd used my entire life. My labor equals her safety. I didn't raise my voice. I asked one question. "Why do you think I owe you this?" She blinked. "Because I'm your mother." I felt something click into place, clean, final. "I worked when I was a teenager," I said. "And you took everything, thousands of dollars. Did you ever pay any of that back?" She frowned. "That was different. I was struggling." "So was I said, "and I was a child." She called me dramatic, said she did her best. I shook my head. Your best wasn't enough. And then I turned around and walked back inside. She stayed there for 10 minutes. I watched from the window as she stood under the streetlight, not crying, not moving, just waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. A week later, she came back. Early morning, Saturday, buzzing the intercom nonstop. Tom called the police non-emergency line. An officer arrived, spoke to her, issued a formal warning. He came upstairs afterward and asked if we wanted to file a report. Tom said yes. I didn't hesitate. That was the turning point. Not because it punished her, but because it protected me. 2 months have passed since then. She hasn't returned. She's still working at the diner, living in a weekly motel, picking up extra shifts. I know this because a cousin mentioned it casually, like weather. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt free, because in choosing myself, without cruelty, without vengeance, without lies, I had finally broken the cycle. I didn't save her, but I saved myself. And that choice would shape everything that came next. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded quietly, the way truth usually does, without drama, without announcement, but with a finality that couldn't be undone. After the police warning, my mother stopped showing up at our apartment. No more buzzing intercoms, no more waiting on the steps, no surprise appearances designed to corner me into compliance. But her world didn't magically reset, it narrowed. Word traveled through the family, not because I spread it, but because people compared notes for the first time. Stories that had lived separately for years finally lined up side by side. One cousin mentioned the unpaid loan. An aunt brought up the constant emergencies. Another admitted she'd stopped inviting Denise to gatherings years ago because she always asked for money before dessert. No one confronted her directly. They just stopped engaging. Billy finalized the breakup. There was no reconciliation, no dramatic fight that made its way back to me. Just a clean withdrawal. His family closed ranks. His businesses stayed protected. His lawyer handled the rest. The wedding my mother had bragged about, planned, embellished, exaggerated, never happened. And the image she'd tried so hard to maintain collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Meanwhile, my life didn't implode the way she'd predicted. It stabilized. Tom's parents never once asked if I felt guilty, never suggested I should be the bigger person. His mom hugged me one evening while we were doing dishes together and said simply, "You did what you needed to do." That sentence stayed with me. At work, I focused better, slept better. My shoulders stopped carrying tension I hadn't realized was permanent. I didn't jump when my phone buzzed anymore. I didn't rehearse explanations in my head before family events. I existed without bracing for impact. The strangest part was how ordinary everything became. Life didn't reward me with fireworks for choosing myself. It rewarded me with peace. I heard updates about my mother the way you hear updates about a distant acquaintance. Still at the diner, still picking up extra shifts, still living week to week, still telling people her daughter turned cold. No one corrected her. They didn't need to. Her story no longer held power. Once, a cousin asked me quietly if I felt bad. I thought about it honestly before answering. "I feel sad," I said, "but I don't feel wrong." That difference mattered, because sadness meant I was human. But not feeling wrong meant I was finally free. Tom and I started planning a short trip. Nothing extravagant. Just a week somewhere quiet. No obligations, no family politics, just rest. His parents were proud of us, not for cutting someone off, but for refusing to let manipulation masquerade as love. And slowly, without fanfare, I realized something important. My mother didn't lose me because I was cruel. She lost access to me because I stopped lying. To her, and to myself. The fallout wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And accountability doesn't scream. It simply stands firm and lets reality do the rest. By the time I understood that, the guilt she'd trained into me for decades had nothing left to stand on. Because guilt only survives when it's fed. And I had finally stopped feeding it. 2 months have passed since the last time my mother stood outside our apartment, waiting for me to bend. She hasn't come back. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. There was no dramatic transformation, no instant healing montage where everything snapped into place. What happened instead was quieter and more real. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped wondering how to phrase things so she wouldn't explode. I stopped feeling responsible for fixing a woman who had spent my entire childhood teaching me that love came with conditions. Tom and I are planning a trip next month. Just a week somewhere calm, somewhere anonymous. His parents are happy, not relieved, not smug, just content that we handled things with honesty and boundaries. And my mother? She's still working at the diner, living in a weekly motel, getting by. I don't feel satisfaction about that. I don't feel guilt either. It's just information. That's the clearest sign that something inside me has healed. For a long time, I thought being a good daughter meant enduring whatever was asked of me. I thought forgiveness was something you owed automatically, no matter the cost. I believed love meant sacrifice, even when the sacrifice was always one-sided. I know better now. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior, by who protects you when you're vulnerable, by who shows up when it matters, by who doesn't ask you to destroy yourself so they can stay comfortable. My mother made her choices over decades. She chose money over parenting, image over honesty, control over care. I made my choice too. I chose peace. Some people might call that harsh. I call it necessary. Because the truth is this: setting boundaries doesn't make you unloving. It reveals who was depending on your lack of them. And walking away doesn't mean you didn't care. Sometimes it means you cared enough about yourself to stop bleeding quietly. This chapter is closed. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. And that finally feels like freedom.